CNN reporter and anchor were discussing the Tea Party, and they had a bit of an argument over terminology. Let's watch.
The sort of Tea Party radicals, if you like, who kicked all of this off, they electorally are safe. They're not going to lose their seats because of redistricting and the like. They're more about ideology than pragmatism.
Well, Michael, I mean, first of all, let's be careful about using the term radical, because a lot of those folks feel like they're standing on principle today, even though they didn't come out on top in this. But to get to your question.
Yeah, so there's CNN taking a strong stand. Well, we can't call them radicals. You know, they hold positions of power. And they believe it, so how could it be extreme?
Yeah, I'm going to go the other way here. I might surprise some folks. I actually didn't mind him saying that.
What?
Okay, and I'll tell you why. Because, for two reasons. Number one, if it was Occupy people and they had stood on principle and said, hey, look, the bankers have to be held accountable, it's possible that the CNN anchor calls them radicals, and I would like a reporter to say, hey, wait a minute, actually, that's not that radical.
Right, but in that scenario, the anchor would be wrong. In this scenario, the anchor was 100% correct. Our economy lost $24 billion because of Tea Party bullshit.
You just false equivalence to them. I mean,
no, I hear you. I hear you. Look.
Wait, is he angling for a job at CNN?
Yes, yeah.
No, look, Anna, to your point, I can see the Occupy movement, if they had any congressman, which they don't, right, standing on principle and doing something that people would say, oh, well, you know what, that shut the government down, or whatever it was, and it cost us $24 billion, and I would say that's perfectly fine. But to both of your points, you're right, of course, it is a false equivalency, because the Occupy movement, based on polling of American people, represent really mainstream views. They're portrayed by the establishment media as radical and wild-eyed, and that's part of what's driving my, like, hey, easy calling everybody radicals, right? And the Tea Party does not, right? They shut down, it was 74% disapproval rating, and they wanted to shut down. So, and then, although the Tea Party does represent smaller government, which probably wins a majority among the American people, so I'm just a little reluctant to just categorize
but not what they're talking about here. I mean, we showed that, like, being willing to shut down the government to defund Obamacare polled at 6% among Republicans. Even most Tea Party people do not like that. Like, 6%, you can't come up with a policy that's less popular. Also, sterilizing the poor would be more popular than that. So that, in this instance, at the very least, it makes them literally the definition of extreme and radicals.
Well, first of all, look at the reporter. First of all, who's the Aussie that CNN has hired? This Michael Holmes fella.
I like it.
Yeah, but Jim Acosta, the reporter, I mean, he's a conservative just on hair alone.
I love that new phrase, on hair alone.
Look at it for crying out. But like
TYT bringing facts to this.
But I don't know. I like you, Cenk. I like the idea of a reporter willing to challenge an anchor on a. In this case, like if the people who shut down the government, if Ted Cruz is not a radical, then we don't have radicals in government. Which is a fair thing to argue, but if he
didn't throw grenades or anything like that.
He's the American equivalent of a radical. They hate government. They wanted it defunded. They love it that it's defunded. They would like it to. They would have liked the shutdown to continue. They just thought that's just money saved day after day after day, even though
it wasn't.
Let me see if I can get an agreement here. What if Jim Acosta had said, in this case, I understand why you're saying that, because their actions were judged to be radical by the American people based on the polls. But the Tea Party is not necessarily radical as an entire entity. I know that's a long thing to say before you're about to make your point, but would that have been fair?
I mean, that's just, but if that had been said by Michael Holmes or if that had been said by Jim Acosta on the correction?
Jim Acosta on the correction.
I mean, that's a lot of equivocating. Like, get to your point.
Be fine. I don't necessarily agree, but I think that would have been okay.
We don't, of course, because, we're not George Bush. We can't see into Jim Acosta's heart, and I don't know.
Soul.
Despite the hair. I don't know. But it strikes me that calling the Tea Party radical seems fair, but it's also fair to argue it. So it's not. I don't really think anybody is totally wrong here.
Yeah, I guess my last point on this is that I'm so wary of the establishment, ostracizing anything it does not agree with. Mm-hmm. In this case, I agree with you guys. They're right. They were not backed by the polls. They were radical according to the polls. The action was radical, and it led to terrible results, right? Yeah. When the corporate, we're in the weird position of being on the side of the corporatist here, right? It was a corporatist versus the Tea Party, right? And the corporations rose in their fury at the end and said, you are not going to mess with the debt ceiling. Mm-hmm. And the Tea Party backed down. And then hence they were, look, here's the thing. The reason I frame it in the corporatist thing. Look, the rational people were also on that side.
That's why
right. Okay.
I rolled my eyes a little bit.
Yeah, okay. And that's fair and that's true. But I guess what I'm getting at is that the CNNs of the world and the establishment media of the world didn't back us because the rationals were there. They backed us because the corporations were there.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And so when the corporate media comes in and says, radical Tea Party, when before they were the beloved Tea Party, the mainstream Tea Party.
And they'll go back to that.
Right? And the powerful and important Tea Party that really needed to be taken into account, now that they cross corporate America, all of a sudden they're the radical Tea Party. Yeah. That's the part that's getting me to pause and say, well, maybe Acosta has a point.